Long-term alcohol consumption, so drinking above those recommended guidelines, increases your risk of long-term changes in hormonal secretion. We know that people that drink alcohol a lot are at risk of muscle atrophy and a decrease in muscle mass and accumulation of body fat. This is particularly true for males. Females actually get off a little bit lightly.
Hi, Matt. It's my pleasure to have you on Evidence Strong Show. If you could briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Matt Barnes. I guess my formal title is Associate Professor. So I'm an Associate Professor with Massey University in Palmerston North, New Zealand. I guess I research, I teach. I'm also Deputy Head of School, so I have a lot going on. My background relevant to our conversation today is I did my PhD looking at the effects of alcohol on recovery after exercise and have sort of continued on to do a little bit of that, but probably more now my research is around looking at different interventions for recovery, strategies to improve performance, things to alleviate fatigue, that type of stuff. But deep down, one of my main passions is sort of strength and power training, I suppose. Don't necessarily get to do as much research in that area as I like. You kind of end up chasing the dollar, which means that you do stuff that makes ends meet in terms of research, and maybe that frees up a little bit of time for doing the stuff you really enjoy, which might be, looking at different periodization strategies or just different ways to enhance performance.
So today we're talking all things alcohol, sports performance, and recovery. So let's start in general. What the alcohol does to human body?
Okay, so a lot of alcohol's effects are going to depend on the dose that you're drinking, not necessarily the type of alcohol, because ultimately alcohol is alcohol. Whether you have a glass of red wine, a bottle of beer, a shot of whiskey, alcohol is alcohol. So what we're putting in our body is ethanol. So we have a drink, it goes into the stomach, and there's a small amount of metabolism that occurs in the gut. Okay, so that sort of reduces some of the impact of alcohol immediately, but not a lot. Most of the alcohol is absorbed straight into your bloodstream and is circulated around the body. Now, alcohol's water soluble, so it has the ability to go into every cell that water can go into, which means it can have an effect on every cell in the body, essentially. So the brain, skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, blood cells, pretty much it can have an effect on everything, which is a big problem. Now, obviously, the main reason we drink alcohol is for the effect on the brain, right? So it's a intoxicating, highly addictive substance, but at low doses, it can make us feel really good. It can even steady our nerves. So alcohol is actually banned in some target sports because it steadies your nerves. And it might be why you see darts players having a pint with their darts, it sort of steadies their nerve. It's probably also low level alcoholism perhaps, but that's another thing to think about. So once it's in the body, it's being circulated, it will go into all the different tissues, and depending on the amount of body water that you have, it will have a greater or lesser effect on the body. So if we're thinking about strength power athletes who may have large amount of lean muscle mass, then a drink will be less concentrated, or the alcohol will be less concentrated in their body compared to someone who maybe has less muscle mass, higher fat concentrations. So that means for someone who's bigger, a standard drink, which in most countries is about 10 grams of alcohol, will have fairly minimal effects versus someone who's smaller. And this is where gender differences come in. So if the two of us, I haven't had a lot of alcohol in recent years, but if the two of us were drinking and I'm say 113 kilos and you're considerably smaller than that, and we're trying to drink one for one, it's going to have a bigger effect on you because you will have just less body water in total. So once it's in our system, eventually it's going to be broken down by the liver. So the liver, whether you're male or female, will break alcohol down at about 7 grams an hour. So if you think about a standard drink being 10 grams, it's not even really breaking down or metabolizing a standard drink each hour. So that's where thinking about the rate of alcohol consumption and its effects come into play. So if you're drinking faster than one standard drink an hour, the alcohol is going to accumulate in your body and it's going to have a greater effect on all of those tissues that it's able to get into and sort of interfere with. So it's broken down, metabolized, and I guess from the outset we should think about alcohol as a toxic agent, I suppose. Right, it does no good to anything in the body. Unlike carbohydrate and protein and fat, it's not stored in the body. It's not an essential macronutrient. The body simply does not need alcohol. And as such, because of its toxic nature, the body prioritizes its elimination. So once it gets into the body, it's going to forget about metabolizing carbohydrate or fat. It's going to do everything it can to eliminate alcohol. So it preferentially breaks down alcohol using lactate dehydrogenase, and it releases the end product, which is acetate. I don't want to get into too much chemistry, but basically acetate is then released from the liver into the bloodstream and taken up by other tissues, so muscle, brain, and used as energy. So acetate can come in and be used to produce energy, so ATP. And while it's doing that, it's coming through, that's possibly being done to the detriment of fat oxidation. So we can end up having fat accumulation. If we drink lots, we're no longer metabolizing fat as we normally would. We might end up with this accumulation of fat because we're not using it as energy. So that's kind of the biochemical side of things. Breakdown of alcohol produces energy like any of the other macronutrients. It's probably producing, 13 ATP per gram of alcohol or something like that. It's fairly inefficient, but it is an energy source and we'll use it and pretty much carry on. But while it's in the body, it will have an effect on most of the processes. It can have effects on the permeability of the cell membrane. It obviously alters the brain, going from a low dose where it might be a fun thing to have to quite a depressive, having quite a depressive action on the brain. Even to the point is if you continue drinking large amounts in a single session, you can reach the point of coma and death. I think if we think about it in terms of what's important for the strength power athlete in particular, alcohol has the ability to alter hormone secretion. So, and again, it's in a dose dependent kind of manner. So low doses, moderate amounts of alcohol have relatively minimal effects. But things like testosterone, so it can decrease testosterone production in males. It increases estrogen production in both males and females. And obviously for males, that's not what you want, right? So estrogens, you look at people who rely heavily on alcohol, males in particular, they will have a greater accumulation of fat, particularly around their middle. They might have breasts, fatty breasts. So it can shift you from having sort of masculine features more towards a female feature because of that increase in fat deposits and changes in hormone secretion. Decrease in testosterone decreases muscle mass, can have an effect on bone density. So fairly detrimental. The effects of changes in hormones in females can be equally detrimental. So an increase in estrogen probably increases the chances of females getting breast cancer. And there's really strong evidence to suggest that even small amounts of alcohol, so maybe 1 or 2 drinks a week, increases your chance of getting breast cancer by sort of upwards of 15 or 20%. So there's these big changes in normal function that can have fairly detrimental effects on your overall health and well-being.
You said 7 grams takes an hour for the body to break down, I guess.
Yes.
So if we think athletes celebrating or going for dinner with friends, having some alcohol, and then trying to perform the next day or train hard next day, how do you think it influences that? We're talking strength athletes or power athletes. So
Yeah, strength power. Yep. Again, it probably depends on the dose. I would say that, well, actually, even high doses probably don't have a detrimental effect on next day performance. So one of the studies that we did after my PhD, I supervised a master's student, and we had 2 rugby teams. And rugby's a famous sport for drinking, huge alcohol issues in most team sports actually. But these guys, strength and power is important. They're not pure strength power athletes, but it's
yes.
it's an important thing. So we let the 2 teams play each other, and we let one team go out and drink like they would normally do, and we controlled the behavior of the other team, and we retested them next day and the day after that, so Saturday night. Average self-reported alcohol consumption was 19 standard drinks for the evening.
Wow.
Our survey only went up to 20. Some of the guys said that they had at least 30 that night. Their average sleep was 3 hours for that night, and their diet was all over the place, right? The next day there was, someone reported all he ate on a Sunday was 2 carrots. Another guy had 3 meat pies. So it just changes everything. But what we found is there was almost no difference between the two groups, right? When we came back and we measured repeated sprint ability, we measured vertical jump as a measure of power. We did the mid-thigh pull to measure lower body force development. Other than seeing a very small difference in vertical jump height, there was no difference between the two. So that was really interesting. And and we did another study where they didn't play the game of rugby, and we just let them go out and they drank same sort of amount, and there was again no difference. And that's similar to what other research has shown, that the next day performance, particularly strength and power, where you can usually get up for one off or a couple of maximal efforts, it's not being affected by even really heavy alcohol consumption. If you go out and you drink a lot and you have a hangover, there's no physiological changes that impact your ability to perform strength power movements. There might be detrimental effects on coordination. So perhaps if you're going to go into the gym and you're going to work on your clean and your snatch the next morning, which rely on submaximal loads, but you're working more on technique, then perhaps your coordination is going to be out and you're not going to be training as efficiently as you should be. But physiologically, there's nothing to show that the amount of force and power that you can produce in that state is going to be reduced, particularly if you can overcome the sensations of sickness and tiredness that usually are associated with a hangover. And the same is true for sort of cardiovascular exercise. If you can overcome feeling like rubbish, then physiologically you can perform, right? And a lot of it comes down to how often you drink like that. You get used to it, and you can learn how to perform in those states. But yeah, interestingly, strength power not really affected in that hangover state, even at really high doses. But again, if we think about how we train, 5 or maybe 1 to 5 reps for strength and power sets over very, very quickly. Then you can have a long rest period. It's not massively taxing. I guess possibly the increase that we get in blood pressure with heavy loading might exacerbate a headache that's been caused by a hangover. But again, that's just how you feel. And if you can work through how you feel, you're probably absolutely fine.
Okay, so let's go into long-term alcohol consumption, because maybe short-term, the next day, the power and strength performance will not be influenced. But let's say the athlete decides to drink every weekend with friends and is also preparing for national competition. How this will play out?
Yeah, I think there's not a lot of research on that scenario. So much of the research is just acute. Like, all my studies were just acute. Give a dose of alcohol, let's see what happens. And that's been the case for almost all of the alcohol research. From a lot of it started in the 1980s, where they still thought that alcohol was actually good for your performance. It was an ergogenic aid, and there was like, take alcohol, it increases your aggressiveness and decreases pain sensations, and it'll make you perform better. But actually, there's very little support for that now. Drinking regularly, once or twice a week, and often athletes do that. So the research from particularly team sport athletes, but it would be no different probably for many individual athletes, you'd sacrifice during the week, good diet, training hard, and then you reward yourself with maybe a Friday or a Saturday night, and you go out and you binge on alcohol or something like that. Long-term alcohol consumption, so drinking above those recommended guidelines, increases your risk of long-term changes in hormonal secretion. We know that people that drink alcohol a lot are at risk of muscle atrophy and a decrease in muscle mass and accumulation of body fat. This is particularly true for males. Females actually get off a little bit lightly, even though there's an increased risk of breast cancer, which is, and that's serious enough, right? To take some changes or some steps in your life. For males, it appears that drinking alcohol can decrease protein synthesis, which could have a flow-on effect into your ability to produce new muscle or repair muscle. Females, not to the same extent. And for males, even drinking a moderate amount can lead to the accumulation of fat around the midsection. You think about the beer belly, that's sort of the classic. Moderate alcohol consumption, particularly in females, is actually associated with lower body fat than people that don't drink alcohol or people that drink lots of alcohol. So there might be a bit of a, not sure, but I don't think they've nailed that. It might be just increasing certain hormones enough to have a beneficial effect, but it's quite different in males. So long-term drinking alcohol like that, especially if it's after training. So let's say you train Friday afternoon and then you go to the pub. So drinking particularly large amounts of alcohol after training will have a detrimental effect on protein synthesis. It can also, because of those metabolic changes or the way we handle fat metabolism and carbohydrate metabolism, it can lead to the accumulation of fat. Alcohol is an appetite stimulator. So if you're out drinking, it can make you feel hungrier. And when you're intoxicated, you tend to make bad decisions around nutrition as well. So you can end up eating more. You're drinking calories, because 7 calories per gram of alcohol, plus if it's in Coke or lemonade or whatever you're drinking with, suddenly all your energy's out of sync, and you've suddenly eaten 2,000 more calories than you should on that day. So if that's happening on a regular basis, then the likelihood you might be impairing your ability to produce as much muscle as you want to recover and to grow, but also you might be inadvertently changing your body composition. Now, if you're an athlete and you don't want to ever accumulate fat, there's no reason for that. But if you're an athlete who's competing in a weight class,
Yes,
then you're really undermining your ability to make the appropriate progress to either stay or meet the weight class that you want to compete in. There's also, if you're drinking regularly in high amounts, there's also the increased risk of making silly decisions, increased chance of risky behavior, whether that's getting into a fight, throwing yourself around, having an accident, which will undermine your ability to train, unprotected sex. There's any number of bad decisions that happen when we're drinking. So the more often you do that, the greater the chance of that kind of thing happening as well. There's only one study that I'm aware of that has looked at long-term alcohol consumption in an exercise context, and they had had participants consume a couple of beers a day, every day, and they were doing a form of concurrent training. So a bit of resistance exercise and a bit of, I think, possibly high intensity interval training, say over 8 to 12 weeks. And they found that moderate, so that's still quite, well, it's borderline moderate alcohol consumption, had no detrimental effect on the adaptations that they saw with that type of training. So participants got fitter, they got stronger, but drinking a small amount of alcohol while training didn't have any detrimental effect. Whether the same is true at high doses, I don't really know. The research would suggest that the trouble starts when we are drinking high doses. So all of my research and my stuff was probably some of the earliest research, I suppose, to start looking at the effects of alcohol on recovery. We used 1 gram of alcohol per kg of body weight, just in males. So I think the biggest guy we had was probably, let's say, 120 kilos. So that was 12 standard drinks, an hour and a half.
Wow.
So that's fair going. Smaller, obviously smaller people, but it's all proportional. That dose has been used in quite a few other studies. There is a lab in the US that's done quite a bit of alcohol research. They use 1.09 grams per lean body mass, but they get them to drink it. So for, what does that equate to? I think in most of their studies, they were using about 8 standard drinks, but they get them to drink it in 10 minutes. So 8 standard drinks of vodka in 10 minutes. I question the validity of that. Yes, it gets the alcohol in the system, but I don't know anybody who drinks like that. So that particular lab has shown that style of drinking changes testosterone production, has an impact on other hormones, has a detrimental effect on muscle protein synthesis in males but not in females. But you have to put all of this into context. Who drinks like that? Anybody who's serious, I would think anyone who's serious about strength and power training is not going to be drinking. Well, no one's going to drink 8 standard drinks in 10 minutes anyway. But even my dose was pretty high, right? The other study that showed there was a detrimental effect on protein synthesis, and that was after a bout of concurrent training, so intervals and resistance exercise. The average dose that their participants were taking over a couple of hours was 12 standard drinks. So again, we're starting to see, I would say, very, very high doses of alcohol. There's some detrimental effect. Below that, there's probably no or little effect, and we don't know enough about the dose response. So when we think about the recommendation of binge drinking's 4 standard or 5 standard drinks, we've got studies, most of our studies have doubled that, 10, 12, or even 8 in a single session. That's when we're getting into trouble. And yes, athletes do drink like that, and they drink like that too often, but we do need to put all those findings into some context, because there's other studies that show that actually protein synthesis isn't affected by a moderate dose of alcohol, and you can have a few drinks and it won't do you any harm whatsoever in terms of those characteristics that we want to build through resistance exercise. Then we think about, and often these kind of talks end up being how to best become drunk, because you can reverse the conversation and think, well, I want to become drunk, what shouldn't I do? So if you want to become drunk, don't have something to eat before or during alcohol consumption, because our food slows the absorption of alcohol. It increases the amount of alcohol that's broken down in your stomach, so less actually gets into your bloodstream to start with. It increases the rate that it will be metabolized. Drink low concentration drinks if you're being sensible. Beer versus a spirit. Carbonated drinks versus a drink that's non-carbonated. Carbonated drinks are actually, I think they metabolize more slowly. So there's lots of things that influence how alcohol affects us, but in particular food is one of the big ones. And it doesn't matter what type of food. So whether it's mixed meal, whether it's just carbohydrate, whether it's just protein, whether it's just fat, they're all going to slow down the rate at which alcohol enters your body, which means that alcohol is going to have less chance of accumulating and having those detrimental effects on you.
All right, could we talk a little bit more about recovery? So
Yeah.
the biggest component of recovery is sleep. Do we agree on that?
Yes, absolutely.
So how the alcohol will influence sleep in particular?
Yes, and it's an interesting one because I think there's a huge misconception here about the benefits of alcohol. People often say, I'll have a drink and it helps me get to sleep. Well, if you need alcohol to get you to sleep, you've got a drinking problem, I would say. But no, it doesn't help you get to sleep. It might feel like that, but what it can do, and again, dose dependent, it actually disrupts your sleep quality. You have a lower sleep quality, so less restful, less time in that REM deep sleep. It is likely to decrease the secretion of growth hormone while you're sleeping. So you'll wake up, and I guess this might feed into the way you feel so horrible after, in that hangover state. You've had a disrupted sleep the night before. It's all contributing to the way you feel. But in terms of recovery, yes, less sleep, lower quality of sleep, probably less growth hormone release, so less repair, less adaptation occurring during that important phase of recovery. Yeah, so no, it's not helpful.
So in terms of long-term recovery for athletic performance, that would be one of the aspects to keep in mind, that the sleep will be disrupted, the way that quality will be lower, all these aspects you mentioned, that will
Yeah, and you might end up with, accumulated fatigue and tiredness, which will have a flow-on effect into your ability to train and perform. There's been a few studies that have shown that the combination between alcohol and sleep deprivation doesn't have an effect on measures of strength and power. But again, it's an acute study, right? So doing it once might be fine, but what happens if you do it every week or twice a week? We simply don't know. But my gut feel would be that it's not going to be any good for you. If you've got less growth hormone being secreted on a regular basis and you're putting yourself through highly stressful training, it can't be useful.
I think it can come back to what you said at the beginning, that the getting rid of alcohol is a priority for the body. So the building muscle is not the priority then. So
yeah, it's catabolic. Alcohol is essentially catabolic. It changes the hormonal profile to something that's not anabolic, it's catabolic. And if we're doing that regularly, even at moderate doses, it'll be chipping away at your ability to adapt. Yeah. And we know we know alcoholics have essentially muscle wasting disease. They have a fatty liver, which means that they can't metabolize alcohol. And then we haven't even touched on the addictive nature of alcohol. You adapt and you need more to get the fix. It's a drug after all. Other than caffeine, it's probably the most widely used drug in society. The more you use it, the more you need. The more that you need and use, the greater the effects on all of the rest of the body. So it's not wonderful.
Would you like to extend on the addiction part of the alcohol?
I guess I don't know how much more I could say. It's obviously the major issue, really. And I think it's very easy to become addicted to alcohol and to need it and use it as a social crutch. Obviously, breaking down that sort of social inhibition that people have and then relying on that in a social environment can turn into a fairly serious addictive kind of problem. And we get upregulation of lactate dehydrogenase, which is the enzyme that breaks down alcohol. So we end up breaking down alcohol more effectively as we drink more and more. So it's one of these adaptations, a bit like by any other enzyme, I suppose, that we adapt to. So you're breaking it down and you're not getting, because it's being broken down more effectively, you're not getting the same effect for a given dose. So no longer 2 drinks no longer have a bit of a buzzy feeling. You need 4, and then eventually 4 will no longer give you a buzzy feeling. So you need 6, and it sort of spirals out of control. So that's kind of, I guess, the underlying physiology of that adaptation that we get to the stress that we're placing on the body, because the body, it's producing more enzymes for a reason. It wants to get rid of the alcohol, just like any other adaptation. When you're trying to get this message out to athletes, you need to treat yourself like any other human being and pay attention to all the other effects that alcohol has on the body. For everybody, you're not special just because you're an athlete. You're still a human. It will still decrease testosterone. It will still increase your risk of multiple cancers. Alcohol, even moderate amounts of alcohol, are not good for you. It's linked to 200 different diseases and illnesses. That will affect you as a human, whether you're an athlete or not. That's the approach that you should take. Think about moderation, safety, eliminate risk-taking behaviors. I think that's the bigger thing to consider. Yeah, as opposed to thinking, it might decrease how much I can squat by 1 kilo tomorrow because I had a pint. It's inconsequential, probably.
Okay, so maybe drinking before the meet or competition, not a good idea not necessarily for performance reasons, but how the person will feel hangover.
Yeah.
If the social situation calls for going out and having a drink with a team with dinner, or then drinking slowly, drinking less rather than more, and eating while you're drinking, that would be the way to go. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, comes down to everything in moderation, taking a sensible approach. I don't think there would be anything wrong with having a beer or a glass of wine with your dinner before the competition the next day. It won't have any effect on you whatsoever. Even a couple of drinks won't have any effect. Now, if you have never drunk alcohol before and that's the time you decide to start, well, that's pretty stupid because you don't know how you're going to respond. But if it's part of your normal life and you regularly sit down and you have a glass of wine, in many of the European countries, that's very traditional to sit down, have a glass of red wine from even a relatively early age. It's just part of society. You will handle that perfectly fine. A couple of drinks, probably not going to have a massive impact on your sleep. So I would say don't drink and then go to sleep immediately. So if you're going to have it with dinner, give yourself a few hours so that the alcohol is metabolized, then you go to sleep. Probably follow normal sports nutrition guidelines. Make sure you're hydrated. Make sure you're getting plenty of carbohydrate, protein leading into an event or training. Follow all of those guidelines and you will probably be absolutely fine even with a few drinks. Alcohol, a few drinks is not going to dehydrate you massively. So again, have a glass of water with your alcohol or drink something, non-alcoholic afterwards. You're perfectly fine. What you wouldn't do, you wouldn't go out and binge drink the night before. And I don't know anybody who takes their sport seriously would consider that as even an option. Don't get yourself into a situation where you start making bad decisions around alcohol use in whatever circumstance, but particularly before competition. Peer pressure can be an issue, but think about what your priority is. There's always a chance to celebrate the night after the competition instead of ruin your performance the night before.
What the gist of alcohol and lifting is?
Yeah, okay. So I guess take home message, moderate alcohol consumption is not likely to be detrimental to your training adaptation or your training performance or your competition performance. Regular heavy alcohol consumption won't do you any favors whatsoever and may be detrimental to those factors that are important to you. But just take a common sense approach. Treat alcohol like the toxin that it is. Pay attention to your country's guidelines for safe alcohol use, and you really can't go wrong as an athlete.
Okay, two short questions to finish. The first one is, what is your favorite lift?
My favorite lift, probably squat, I think. It is dependent on the state of my body, but I've always enjoyed the squat as a challenge. I don't know, there's something about when you get the groove right, you come up and everything feels good. The tension that it creates from head to toe, it's just amazing movement, I think. Yeah.
Where people can find you online if they want to look at your work or catch up, ask some questions.
Yeah, they'll have to look pretty hard because I don't have much of a profile online. If you're interested in my research, then probably Google Scholar is the easiest way to find that. Just look up probably Matthew Barnes or Matthew J. Barnes and alcohol will get you to most of my work. You can find my contact details on the Massey University website if you ever need. I'm more than happy to send out articles or answer questions.
All right, Mark, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Cool. Yeah, no, great meeting you and great chatting. Thank you.